In this video, we'll create direct launch URLs that takes users straight to their AVD desktops and apps. No extra clicks, just instant access. Hey everyone, I'm Travis and welcome to Seraltos. Today, we're building URLs that launch AVD desktops and apps directly. That means skipping the initial web app interface and jumping right into the desktop or application. But before we dive in, please hit like, subscribe, and click that bell icon so you don't miss new content. And if you want to learn more, check out my courses on Udemy. The links are below. And a big thanks to all my channel members. Your support means a lot. All right, let's get back to it. The Windows app is great for anyone that uses AVD every day, especially if you're accessing multiple resources. But sometimes people need just a quick link to one thing, maybe a consultant logging time or a temp worker. That's where direct URLs come in. With AVD and Windows 365, we can create a link that takes users straight to a remote desktop or remote app. This is perfect for sharing in an email, embedding in a web page, or putting it in documentation. And another advantage, it doesn't require installing the Windows app client. So if someone can't install the app, they can still get to the resource with the web browser. Now, there is a catch. These links only work with the Windows app web client. We can't use them to launch the Windows app thick client directly. So whoever uses the link will have to deal with the limitations of the web client. In the demo coming up, I'll show you how to create a direct launch URL for both a remote desktop and remote app. We'll test it with an internal user and an external guest user. For external identities, we need to include the tenant ID in the URL, and we'll walk through that also. All the commands and resources are linked below. Let's fire up PowerShell and get started. Here we are in VS Code. This computer is logged into the Azure tenant with the host pools we're creating the direct launch URL for. We need to get the workspace ID for the remote app or remote desktop we're publishing. Then the resource ID of the remote app or desktop. And if we're giving this link to an external user, now supported for AVD and Windows 365, we need to add the tenant ID at the end. All these commands, with one small exception, come from the Microsoft documentation. I'll add a link to that in the description below. In the examples coming up, I'm going to add the tenant ID. The URL will work for both internal and external users with the tenant ID at the end. But you don't need to add the tenant ID if only internal users will use the URL. The first command will get the workspace object ID. We need to supply the resource group name and the workspace name. Let's add that information. Of course, your environment will be different. And next, we'll select and run that block of code. These commands use splatting to pass in the parameters. Check out a video I did recently on splatting if you want to learn more. That gives us the object ID of the workspace. Let's copy that into the URL. The next section gets the application group resource ID. In this example, the resource is the desktop application. Let's add those values and run the command. In this case, it's the same resource group. And I'll copy that resource group. Now that those values are updated, let's select and run the block of code. That gives us the remote desktop object ID. Let's add that to the URL. Finally, this is the optional step of adding the tenant ID. Again, this is only needed if external B2B guest users will use this URL, but it will also work for internal users. The command to get this is get aztenant. This is a command that's not in the Microsoft documentation. You could also get this information from the Enter ID portal. Let's update the tenant ID in the URL. Okay, now we have the URL built out. Next, let's copy and paste that into a web browser. I'll use a private browser session so the credentials don't conflict with any other session. I'm using an internal identity for this example. We can click connect. And now it's logging us in. And now we're logged in, bypassing that initial Windows app page. That's how to create a direct link to the remote desktop. We may want to limit the user's access to just an application. Let's create a link to a remote app next. The direct link to the remote app works almost the same way. We need to get the object ID of the workspace the app is published to. The same as the previous example. Provide the workspace resource group a name and run the block of code. That gives us the workspace ID. Let's update the URL with that. Next, we need to get the object ID of the remote app. We do that by providing the resource group name and the application name for the remote app. Let's select and run that block of code. That returns the applications in the group. We want to direct link to just one notepad for this example. Let's copy notepad's object ID, and we'll paste that to the resource ID. And just like before, we can add the tenant ID if external B2B identities are using the link. Use the getAZTenant command to get that tenant ID. The URL is complete. Let's try it next. For this example, I'm using a guest account, and I also have a recent video on guest accounts in AVD. The link's below if you're interested. Let's open the browser and go to the URL. Just like before, we'll use a private or incognito window. This way, the credentials don't conflict with any other session. We'll sign in with an external identity. And that brings us straight to the application. We now have direct launch URLs for remote desktop and remote apps in AVD. That is how you create direct launch URLs for AVD remote desktops and remote apps. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.